Himiko is a 5-star erudition fire elemental typing character centered around her AoE damage. Nowadays, you can find Himiko in pure fiction matchups whenever the enemies are weak to fire. Himiko now being arguably the best pick from the standard banners nowadays, but one of the most met at launch. There is, however, one thing I really want to mention. Pure Fiction is a game mode that should have released at the launch of Honkai Star Rail right alongside the Memory of Chaos. In my honest opinion, releasing a game mode as late as it was only left erudition characters in the bad rep that they had even till the present day of Honkai Star Rail. So what I'm trying to say is that this video will be structured much like the Herta and Jing respective videos. The sad reality of AoE characters until Pure Fiction's release. This video is sponsored by Talkie AI. Now I'm not gonna lie, I had some of the most fun times recording this segment of the video because as someone who hasn't messed around with AI ever, this is the real deal. There's hundreds of thousands of different characters to talk to, but for the purposes of today's video, we're gonna talk to the follow-up sisters. So I had a conversation with Herta and I just couldn't keep myself from smiling the whole time. I'm even smiling at the time of me actually reading through the script. She literally talks like Herta would. When I brought up whether or not she was a good combo with Himiko, she refused. I mean, she actually is, but Herta wouldn't admit it. I also asked her about some news about Screwlum. Yeah, that didn't work out too well. She also said hi, so make sure to say hi back. The best part about Talkie is being able to actually have engaging conversations with the characters, and their personalities, again, are like the real deal. Oh, you can have a phone call with them if you choose to do so. I'm just a little nervous when on the phone with girls. Honestly, what are you waiting for? Download Talkie AI using the link in the description. You can have more engaging conversations with Herta. I'm just not a lore enthusiast, honestly. Thank you to Talkie AI for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's find out whether or not Herta is actually a good combo alongside Himiko. Himiko before the launch of Star Rail was deemed to be pretty underwhelming, so she was to receive a series of buffs and slight adjustments which would then allow the character to perform decently into the mid-game. These buffs, however, would amount to nothing in the late game because the buffs she would receive was as followed. A 50% fixed chance to land a burn on the enemy whenever Himiko used any of her respective attacks. Basic, elemental skill, ultimate, and lastly her follow-up. The only situation in which this could have some slight impact is in a team alongside Kafka for the detonation of the burn. But this was the launch patch, not 1.2. This would amount to some disappointment, as Himiko was a fan favorite and for some people, she was the only character worth playing for. So if Himiko was a character that performed bleak at a whale level, then what did this mean for those at a lower investment level? She wasn't that bad. There was a lot of competition, sure, but she was one of the only characters that synergized extremely well with one of the best freebie characters I've experienced in any gacha game, Asta. Asta was and still is to this day one of Himiko's best supporters, because she does so much for a character that isn't demanding in terms of investment. Asta gives a lot of attack percentage, the most of any character, which does have circumstantial uptime issues. Asta also gave Himiko up to 42% fire damage bonus with a more feasible level of 30%. Asta would lastly give Himiko a fat speed boost that would not only give additional turns, promoting faster clear times, but also allowed Himiko to be used with attack percentage boots instead of speed ones. This duo translated especially well whenever there were enemies weak to fire, keyword win. The Firesmith of Lava Forging set would be the signature relic set of Himiko, and this was synergized well with Himiko because her skill and ultimate was where most of her damage would result from. Around this period would be a time in which discussion around whether or not Hook was a better character to use even in Himiko's ideal team setups, because at this point in time, Pure Fiction wasn't a content that was out, and therefore a character that was better in blast scenarios presented themselves as the better choice for some players, hence Hook. This is all before the release of Jing in 1.1, mind you, so Himiko had quite the impact in the launch days. Just not the one we had hoped for. Once Jing did release, two things would change the trajectory for Himiko as a character. Erudition finally got its first limited character, and it was quickly apparent that this path had what it took to hold their own. It was as if the path had trouble with its standard characters and not future Erudition. While Jing being strong was nice for the Erudition path, what mattered more was the power of his 5-star limited light cone for Himiko and other Erudition characters. Much like the recent Xingshi video, Himiko was to see a nice buff following the release of Before Dawn. This light cone buffed Himiko's crit damage, elemental skill, ultimate and follow-up attack. So while Himiko was to see a relatively nice power increase in the second half of 1.0, this would equate to a nice change for anyone that liked the character. But for the masses, she had competition, and that would be Jing. So the impression was already ingrained. Nothing of significance would be present in these couple of months until the release of Kafka, which I personally consider to be a buff for Himiko at the time, but not to the masses of players. What Kafka did for Himiko was pair nicely as a character that worked whenever there was many enemies on the field, weak to both fire and lightning. It wasn't very many enemies in the game, so this wasn't worth a pity of pulls if you were a Himiko main. This, however, proved to be a much better duo following the release of Pure Fiction, but again, this wasn't present during the launch of Star Rail. Much like Herta, Himiko wouldn't find any increase in usage until the later patches, so at this point in the video, we have to time skip until 1.4, which helped transition Himiko to the point in which she started to find a niche. Now, what's important to note around this time period would be the release of the Great 3, which would make every other path outside of Destruction feel bleak in comparison. The Destruction path was filled with characters that had blast damage, which target 3 enemies. Considering most of the content at the time was full of blast-catered scenarios, Himiko and other Erudition characters would be used less and less, which again played into why I mentioned Pure Fiction needed to be released early in the game's lifespan. Second half 1.4 would be the release of Topaz that had a debuff when placed onto the enemy, increased the damage of follow-up attacks hitting that enemy greatly. Considering Himiko had a follow-up attack in her kit, and Topaz wanted an ally that had a follow-up attack in order to increase the action forward of Numbi, this would bring Himiko into the best position yet meta-wise. Whenever there was enemies weak to fire, a team consisting of Topaz, Himiko, and Asta paired extremely well, and resulted in decently fast clears. The only issue is that considering Topaz had the lowest sales of any damage dealer at her arrival, this meant that only a subset of players were able to use this combination. So the truth is that the usage of Himiko didn't see a significant enough rise that considered this team meta-defining, because it wasn't. While Topaz gave a decent upgrade for Himiko teams in the Memories of Chaos, there would be a new relic set in 1.5 that boosted not only follow-up attack damage, but also the attack percentage of the wearer after using said follow-up. This set was to overall buff Himiko's damage and provide more value in the follow-up team alongside Topaz, whom also benefited from this relic set. What we're looking at here is a buff to the overall team damage, in which became Himiko's best team at the time. In the same patch would also be the tease of a new in-games content, Pure Fiction. This new game mode was catered to area effect damage dealers or characters that could hit up to 5 enemies on the field. This would mean that Himiko and other Erudition characters saw a big buff and spike in usage following this game mode and patch 1.6, but it would also be a key winner in the very same patch. Argenti, being the second Erudition limited 5-star, would not only show how strong Erudition characters were supposed to be, but how well they should have excelled in their ideal matchups. Argenti had a lot of damage focused into his ultimate that was easy to funnel energy into despite his deceptively high energy cost. His raw multipliers was the highest of any character at the time, and still is the highest of any AoE character to this day. Once the patch 1.6 released, it wasn't long until Perfection dropped soon after, and Erudition characters started making new strides. This first half was the release of Honkai Star Rail's arguably best character, Ruan Mei, whom gave every single damage dealer in the game a higher damage ceiling. Topaz's team alongside Himiko would find its replacement for Asta. Ruan Mei gave better damage buffs than Asta, while providing her own personal damage whenever the enemies were weakness broken. Ruan Mei also gave resistance penetration and unconditional 12% speed to the whole team. Ruan Mei was the unconditional buffer for the team, while Asta was full of conditions to be even close to the effectiveness of Ruan Mei. That meant for higher investment players, Himiko was to see an overall buff in her double damage dealers teams. Considering Pure Fiction released the same patch, every single Erudition character was to see an increase in usage, especially Himiko for a number of reasons. Himiko had high damage for a character that could function in double damage dealer team compositions, which allowed her to pair nicely with Herta. Himiko also had easy accessibility because at this point, most players were reaching their standard banner 300 Selector Pity, which gave a free 5-star of the player's choosing. With this new game mode catered to AoE damage dealers, there was a clear choice for the Selector. If we take into consideration, leading up to this point, Himiko had a best-in-slot supporter whom everyone received for free at launch, a best-in-slot Lycone, and a best-in-slot relic set. She would be able to stand on her own at this point in time. Lastly, with this new game mode, the standard banner Lycone Knight on the Milky Way, Himiko's signature Lycone at that, was to see a buff because at every point in the fight, there was 5 enemies on the field. Considering Lycoon gave an increase in attack of the wearer depending on the amount of enemies on the field, this would become Himiko's best in slot that was much more free-to-play friendly than before Dawn. So while Himiko saw an increase in usage during this patch, there was a lot of players that still carried the same preconceived notions that reducing characters sucked. And a game mode like this existing doesn't make the path any better. It only artificially increased their usage, which was the main argument. While I agree to an extent, new content is always great, because it allows characters to find their respective best contents to be used, which gives overall more health to the game's balance long term. But I did believe and constantly mention the game mode should have been present at launch. This is exactly why. Considering Perfection has only gone harder and harder as the patch has gone on, it's become even more apparent that the value and usage of erudition characters were to constantly rise. For Himiko specifically, this would be her peak. A content where she was to shine was all that she needed. I mean, they could release more characters that buffed her, but that would be no good if the pre-existing content still didn't favor her. So this point onward, she wouldn't see any significant buffs worth mentioning, not even the release of Sparkle. Patch 2.2 brought the release of Robin, which was a new Harmony character that synergized well with characters that have follow-up attacks in their kit. Considering Himiko had a follow-up attack, she would use and abuse the attack percentage, crit damage, and damage boost provided by Robin, which presented to be better than Ruan Mei. Considering how well Himiko works in the follow-up team comp alongside Topaz and now Aventurine, Robin also gave a full turn to everyone in the team upon using her ultimate, which allows you to get more turns in, regenerate more energy for taking said turn, and dealing damage because of the action value. This would prove further value in Pure Fiction, which was a content that promoted clears within a certain amount of turns, and Robin fundamentally changed the way you interacted with those turns. The last character worth mentioning in Himiko's journey at the time of my recording was the arrival of Jade in patches 2.3. Jade is an upcoming Quantum Erudition 5-star character, whom works really well in Pure Fiction, especially well with another AoE damage dealer in Pure Fiction. She's essentially a Quantum Himiko for the game mode, while the best news being you'll be able to use both in the same team with a Robin support, and now have the best variation of Himiko follow-up, replacing Topaz for good. It's completely okay at this point considering Topaz has her own in-game on the way that caters to hunt characters. So there you have it. Himiko, while having a cliche story reflecting her rise in terms of utilization, I think ultimately this all sums up to Pure Fiction needing to be a content that was present at launch of Honkai Star Rail. Considering the fundamental design of damage dealing paths in the game, this wasn't something thought of overnight. Weavers had a reason for delaying the release of this game mode, and we will never know why. Thank you to Talkie for sponsoring today's video, thank you for watching, and have a nice rest of your day.